Before we talk about self-sabotage, we need to talk about blindness. Not the blindness of the eyes, but the blindness of consciousness. Carl Jung used to say that a human being is not destroyed by what they know, but by what they refuse to know. And that is exactly where the shadow is born. Not as a mystical force, but as everything you repress, reject, pretend not to feel, pretend not to think. And the more you pretend, the stronger it gets. The shadow is your invisible side. It's where your disguised rage lives, your denied envy, your most uncomfortable desires, and your cursed intentions. And Jung didn't give a gentle warning. He struck like a sword. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That phrase, when truly understood, changes everything, because it shows that it's not the world that sabotages you. It's the part of you that you never had the courage to face. This sabotage is not a fluke. It's a pattern that comes from within. The job you lost, the relationship that ended explosively, the anger that erupts with the ones you love the most, the fear of rejection, the addiction to pleasing others. None of that is coincidence. It's all pattern, it's all repetition, it's all shadow. And the cruelest part, while you don't see it, you keep blaming others. You'll say the world is unfair, people are ungrateful, life is hard. But behind every tragedy in your life, there is a part of you that helped create the disaster. Maybe in a subtle way, maybe in silence, maybe with a simple "never mind" at the worst possible moment. But it played a part, because the shadow never sleeps. It watches. And when you're at your most vulnerable, it takes the wheel. The shadow is not a monster. It's you, but it's the part of you that you were taught to hate. Since childhood, we learn to hide what is ugly: jealousy, anger, pride, laziness, aggressiveness, sexuality. Everything that didn't fit the ideal of the good boy or the good girl got locked in an internal basement. That basement is the shadow. The problem? What gets locked away doesn't die. What gets locked away rots, and what rots contaminates. Suddenly you start sabotaging yourself without knowing why. You delay everything that matters. You attract people who humiliate you. You feel small around others. And deep down, a voice inside you whispers, "You don't deserve more than this." That voice is the shadow. And until you face it, it will rule every choice in your life. Jung didn't want you to become enlightened, as if searching for some magical salvation. He said the real path is to become whole, and no one is whole without shadow. The idea isn't to kill that dark side. The idea is to know it, to look into the eyes of your pain, your hatred, your desire for revenge, to understand that it's all you too, that you are not just light. And that's okay. The biggest spiritual lie is pretending to be pure. The greatest psychological truth is accepting that you are contradictory. Only those who accept their contradictions can walk without sabotage, because there are no more monsters in the basement. Just parts of you that now have names, have shape, have a voice, but no longer have the power to manipulate you without your awareness. This is the beginning of true inner power, realizing that sabotage comes from within. And so does the cure. Everything starts with the most brutal and liberating act in life, to look at yourself without lies. This is not self-help. This is war. A war where the enemy wears your face, speaks in your voice, and convinces you every single day to stay small. The good news? You can stop now, but only if you're ready to face the price of consciousness, because seeing the shadow hurts. It hurts to realize that you destroyed beautiful things. It hurts to realize you acted as your own enemy. But that pain is what sets you free. That pain is what breaks the cycle. That pain is what kills the ego and gives birth to something new. And that's why this phrase from Jung is the portal. What you don't want to see in yourself governs your life. D. Either you look or you'll be ruled. There is no in-between. There is no neutrality. Either you enter the cave or you'll be led in the dark by forces pretending to be fate. In this video, you'll journey through every layer of the shadow. You'll understand how it's born, how it grows, and most importantly, how it sabotages you in the moments when you most need to win. The journey begins now, and it begins with a mirror. Are you ready to face yourself? The shadow is not a mistake. It's the inevitable byproduct of becoming human. From the moment you're born, the world begins teaching you which parts of yourself are acceptable and which must be buried. The baby who cries too much learns that love can be withdrawn. The curious child who asks too many questions learns that knowing too much is annoying. The boy who feels fear is mocked. The girl who yells is called hysterical. Every time you suppress an emotion to be accepted, a piece of your truth is pushed inward. And there, in the dark, it begins to transform. Not because it's evil, but because it was denied. Not because it's weak, but because it was forgotten. And that is the birth of the shadow. The exile of what is true in order to maintain what is acceptable. Carl Jung understood this in a brutal way. He saw that in trying to become good people, we mutilated ourselves psychologically. We threw into the basement of the mind everything that could make us rejected: aggressive impulses, sexual desires, urges to scream, to run away, to slam our fists on the table. But what is denied does not disappear. It gets repressed. It ferments. And if you don't face it, the shadow retaliates. It sabotages you, not out of cruelty, but out of coherence, because it also wants to exist. And if you keep it in the dark, it finds crooked exits, in an outburst of rage, in an unconscious choice of partner, in a self-destructive pleasure, in an addiction, in an explosion that comes out of nowhere. But it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from you, from an old place, from a scream you forbid yourself to release. This is the true origin of self-sabotage, the accumulation of what has been silenced. Silence, when forced, is not peace, it's repression. And every act of repression is a ticking time bomb. Sooner or later, it explodes, and you call it bad luck, karma, a difficult personality. But what you're seeing is your shadow asking to be recognized. And if you don't listen, it screams. And if you don't understand the scream, it destroys, because no one can keep denying themselves for too long without consequences. And the greatest of those consequences is living a life that is not yours, a life shaped by the fear of rejection, the fear of imperfection, the fear of being real. Jung stated that the more an emotion is repressed, the more power it gains in the unconscious. It's like pushing a ball underwater. You can keep it submerged for a while, but eventually it will burst out, and when it does, you lose control. That's why he said the most important work of adulthood is not to achieve success, but to integrate the shadow. That means recognizing what was lost, listening to what was denied, understanding what you learned to hide. It's a painful process, because it requires you to stop believing in your own mask. It demands you to question your character. It forces you to see the part of yourself that you would judge in someone else. But only then does the shadow stop being a saboteur and become an ally. Only then does the monster step down from the throne and become a guardian. But pay attention, the shadow is not a monster by nature. It becomes a monster because it was left alone in the dark for too long. Think about how many parts of yourself you've rejected just because someone once said they were wrong. Your anger could have been courage. Your jealousy could have been misunderstood love. Your anxiety could have been sensitivity. Your aggression could have been creative energy. But without a space to express themselves, all of it turned into poison. What was power turned into trauma. What was talent turned into fear. What was passion turned into repression. And now you live a mutilated life, trying to seem calm when you're exploding inside, trying to appear generous when you want to scream, trying to look happy while you're rotting. The origin of the shadow, then, is the lie you told yourself in order to survive. A lie that began early, maybe with your parents, maybe at school, maybe in church. But now, as an adult, you have the chance to stop repeating the cycle. And that chance begins with a terrifying yet simple decision: to stop running from yourself. Jung knew that most people would rather stay wounded than heal the truth. Because truth demands sacrifice. It demands courage. It demands looking in the mirror and saying, "I am also what I judge in others." And from that moment, the real human being is born. Not the perfect one, but the whole one. This is the second cut. Now that you understand how the monster was born, are you ready to face it? Because in the next chapter we will dive into childhood, the exact moment when the split began. The place where you first decided to hide who you were, just to be loved. The split doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins in childhood. Even before we learn to speak clearly, we are already absorbing, like emotional sponges, what makes us loved and what gets us punished. Carl Jung said the shadow is born from culture, but the first culture a child knows is the gaze of their parents. The first rejection they feel doesn't come from the world, it comes from home. When you were little and heard boys don't cry or girls shouldn't yell, what you heard wasn't just a phrase, it was a decree. There are parts of you that must be silenced if you want to be accepted. And that is the original wound, the moment of division. The instant when you begin to become two, who you are and who you pretend to be. This division is silent, but devastating. The child realizes that their real feelings, anger, fear, jealousy, sadness, desire for attention, make adults uncomfortable. And to avoid losing the love of those they need the most, they choose to emotionally mutilate themselves. They learn to smile when they want to scream. They learn to say sorry without understanding the mistake. They learn to be sweet so they won't be ignored. They learn to silence their own will to avoid punishment, scolding, or rejection. And every time they repress something real, they lay another brick in the wall between themselves and themselves. That wall is the beginning of the shadow. Jung was surgical when he said, "To be normal is the ideal of the unsuccessful." Because what we call normality is often nothing more than collective theater, a silent pact in which everyone pretends to be stable, balanced, well-adjusted, while inside they are bursting with fear, guilt, frustration, and unspoken desires. The child doesn't want to be normal. They want to be loved. But since they understand that love is conditioned by obedience and sweetness, they begin to kill pieces of themselves. And this psychic self-amputation goes on for decades, until, as adults, they no longer know who they are. They just repeat patterns, they seek approval, they fear displeasing, they avoid conflict at all costs. And all of this is the shadow at work. The shadow of a child who learned that being themselves was dangerous. This moment of division runs deeper than it seems, because it plants in us the belief that negative emotions must be eliminated. But Jung said, don't become a saint, become whole. Emotions like anger, envy, selfishness, and jealousy are natural. The problem is not feeling them, the problem is denying them. Because in denying them, you hand them over to the unconscious. And there, they grow beyond your control. Anger becomes explosion, envy becomes sabotage, selfishness becomes coldness, jealousy becomes manipulation. Everything that was not welcomed becomes a sabotaging agent. And this sabotage is the direct result of the original split. A split that began with a single child's decision to hide in order to survive. Now imagine how many times in your adult life you've stayed silent to keep the peace. How many times you pretended to be okay just to avoid seeming weak. How many times you smiled when every part of you was screaming for help. Those moments aren't maturity, they are symptoms of the split. They are remnants of the character you created in childhood to secure love. A character who now controls your choices, your relationships, your career, your self-esteem. And the cruelest part? You think that character is you, but it's not. It's just a shell. The shadow is behind it. And as long as you keep denying who you really are, including the dark parts, that character will keep sabotaging everything that could go right. Jung's work was to return the human being to their complexity, to show that you don't have to erase the shadow to be good, that you don't have to fake light to be loved, that true love begins when someone sees your shadow and doesn't run. But before that, you have to be the first not to run. You must return to that moment of division and undo the pact. You must say, as an adult, what the child never had the courage to say: I am all of this, including what you didn't want me to be. Only then does the shadow begin to bow, not to denial, but to truth. Because the shadow hates being ignored, but calms when it's recognized. And this is the third cut. The root of sabotage lies in childhood, in the pact to hide who you were to be accepted. And now, as an adult, you can break that pact. But you will need courage, because in the next chapter we're going to dissect exactly how this shadow sabotages your life without you realizing it. It's time to expose the invisible mechanism that destroys your relationships, your plans, your energy, and your self-confidence. Self-sabotage is not an isolated act. It's a mechanism, a psychic circuit assembled piece by piece from the moment you learned that showing your true self would bring punishment, rejection, or abandonment. Carl Jung explained that everything you refuse to face within yourself turns into fate. In other words, you don't attract certain situations, you repeat them unconsciously. Constant failure, emotional abandonment, toxic love, paralyzing fear. These aren't coincidences. They are patterns operating beneath your awareness. Circuits built by your own shadow. And each time you repress a piece of your truth, this mechanism grows stronger. Life, which should be a space for expression, becomes a theater of silent sabotage, where you are the author, the victim, and the accomplice all at once. Imagine an iceberg. The visible part, your persona, is small, social, controlled. The submerged part, the shadow, is vast, chaotic, powerful, and everything you push below that waterline builds up. Desires, impulses, painful memories, traumas, urges. You think you're moving on, but really you're just rerouting escape plans. The unconscious doesn't forget, it archives. And in your most vulnerable moments, a fight, a breakup, a failure, it brings everything back to the surface. You feel like you're losing control, like you're regressing, like once again everything has gone wrong. But it's not bad luck. It's the shadow system activating the sabotage protocol. Jung showed that the unconscious has no ethics. It doesn't care if you want success, peace, or love. It will manifest whatever you repressed. If you repressed anger, it will emerge as an explosion. If you repressed insecurity, it will come as emotional dependence. If you repressed fear of failure, it will disguise itself as perfectionism that paralyzes. And worse, the unconscious builds sophisticated traps. You start gravitating towards situations that replicate your wounds. You choose without knowing. You allow things that seem random on the surface, but are really repetitions of an old script, a script written by your shadow. That's why, so often, you know exactly what you need to do, but don't. You say, I know this person isn't good for me, and go back to them. I know I need to change, and stay the same. I know I'm better than this, and still shrink. That's the point. Rational knowledge isn't enough. Because the saboteur is not in your logic, it's in your unconscious. And the unconscious is fed by everything you've denied. Every undigested emotion becomes shadow, and every unintegrated shadow becomes sabotaging action. You might fight it with discipline, goals, plans, but sooner or later, the saboteur finds a way to pull the brakes, and you'll call it lack of willpower. But it's not. It's the shadow winning once again. There's a recurring pattern among people who constantly sabotage themselves. They fear expansion because growth requires the death of the character, and the character, destructive as it may be, is familiar. It's safe. It's what you know. Breaking the cycle is literally a threat to your old ego. That's why sabotage appears when you're about to take a big step, a new love, a new career, a new habit. The saboteur whispers, "You don't deserve this," or "You're going to mess it up again," or even, "Better not try, stay where you are." And you obey, because that voice comes from within, and it sounds real. But Jung warned, the more unconscious the saboteur is, the more power it holds. The only way to break the cycle is to illuminate the shadow, to bring into consciousness what operates in the dark. That takes effort. It requires brutal inner work. It requires re-examining your beliefs, your memories, your relationships. It requires acknowledging that you are not just a victim, that you also sabotaged yourself, that you also found comfort in pain, that you also ran from what you wanted most because you feared failing. But this recognition is not guilt, it's liberation. It's the beginning of emotional maturity, because only those who recognize the internal saboteur can disarm it. Only those who see the pattern can interrupt the repetition. Only those who take responsibility can build something new. Self-sabotage doesn't disappear with motivational quotes. It dies when you recognize its origin. When you go back to the trauma, the silence, the lie you told yourself, and say, "I don't need to repeat this anymore," that decision changes everything. Because from that point on, the shadow starts losing strength. It won't disappear, but it will stop driving your life. And then you'll see that success, love, health, freedom, they were always within reach. What was missing wasn't more effort. It was more truth. This is the fourth deep cut. Sabotage is nothing but the shadow trying to survive. If you don't integrate it, it destroys you. If you integrate it, it strengthens you. In the next chapter, we'll explore the 5 most dangerous symptoms of the unintegrated shadow, and how they disguise themselves as personality when they are actually cries from a suffocated unconscious. The shadow doesn't arrive with a roar. It comes quietly, in disguise. And when you least expect it, it's already taken control. Carl Jung said, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." This means that what you don't recognize in yourself begins to govern your life in twisted ways. But how do you know if that's already happening? How do you detect whether your shadow, that exiled part of you, is sabotaging your happiness, your relationships, your potential? The answer lies in the symptoms. Not physical symptoms, but symptoms of the soul. And there are 5 that are almost foolproof: addictions, uncontrolled anger, chronic guilt, constant projections, and destructive relationships. Each one is a clear sign that the shadow isn't just alive, it's in charge. The first symptom is addiction. And we're not just talking about substances. Addiction can be to food, work, shopping, pornography, social media, drama, or approval. Addiction is anything you use to fill a psychic void that shouldn't be there. When the shadow carries too many repressed emotions, like sadness, loneliness, humiliation, abandonment, the unconscious seeks relief. And because those pains are not consciously embraced, the mind creates shortcuts, and those shortcuts become addiction. The problem is that addiction doesn't resolve anything, it numbs. And the more you numb yourself, the farther you drift from the truth you need to face. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Addiction is the desperate attempt to escape that pain. But the cost is high, a life that feels numb, artificial, repetitive. The second symptom of an active shadow is uncontrolled anger. Anger itself isn't the problem. It's a legitimate emotion. The issue arises when it explodes disproportionately, when it's directed at people who don't deserve it, when it shows up in moments where you clearly lost your center. That's because repressed emotions don't disappear, they ferment. Anger that wasn't expressed in childhood, for instance, may evolve into destructive rage in adulthood, and often it turns inward. Anger can be swallowed until it becomes depression, insomnia, or psychosomatic illness. The shadow holds these emotions like sticks of dynamite, and if you don't learn to have a dialogue with your anger, it will explode where it shouldn't. The third symptom is chronic guilt. Not real guilt, the one that alerts us when we've done wrong, but distorted, toxic, paralyzing guilt. People with unintegrated shadows carry a constant sense of being wrong, of being inadequate, of not deserving happiness. This guilt often stems from childhood conditioning, beliefs that desire is shameful, that ambition is sinful, that wanting to be seen is egotistical. All of that gets exiled to the shadow, and when these natural impulses try to resurface, guilt shows up to suppress them. This symptom is quiet but powerful. It makes you reject opportunities, sabotage relationships, dismiss compliments, and attract punishment, as if you were trying to pay off a debt that was never real. The fourth symptom is one of the most deceptive: projection. Jung said, "What we do not accept in ourselves, we project onto others." In other words, anything you can't admit you feel, think, or desire, you'll see in someone else, and usually you'll hate it. That's why some people bother you so much. Not because they're bad, but because they reflect something you can't handle in yourself. Projection is the shadow's favorite mechanism. It's what turns you into a moral judge, a harsh critic, a person who's never satisfied with others, when in fact the dissatisfaction is internal. It's much easier to point out flaws in others than to dive into your own abyss. But as long as you keep projecting your shadow, it will keep ruling your world, while you believe it's just your opinion. And finally, the fifth symptom: toxic relationships. When the shadow isn't integrated, it draws you into connections where it can perform. It's as if the unconscious searches for partners who reactivate old wounds, controlling people to relive your helplessness, cold people to reenact abandonment, destructive people to repeat punishment. It's not conscious, but it's powerful. You feel there's something there, and there is. The shadow looking for a stage. Jung said relationships are the greatest mirrors of the psyche. There is no shadow healing without re-examining the kind of love you accept, because love that wounds is not love, it's trauma repetition, and freedom only comes to those who choose to love with awareness, not with desperation. These 5 symptoms are not flaws, they are maps. Each one points to a place where the shadow is alive and asking for light. The turning point is not to blame yourself for having them, but to understand what they're trying to tell you. Addiction reveals where it hurts. Anger reveals what was disrespected. Guilt reveals what was denied. Projection reveals what was rejected. And toxic love reveals where you still believe you deserve to be punished. These signs are not enemies, they're invitations. But only those who have the courage to accept these invitations begin to heal. In the next chapter, we'll move beyond the personal and step into the collective dimension, how the shadow operates on a societal level, shaping behaviors, cultures, and even entire systems of oppression. The shadow is not just yours, it's also ours, and it must be exposed. Carl Jung didn't see the shadow merely as an individual phenomenon. He knew the unconscious doesn't end at the skin. There is something larger, the collective unconscious, a shared psychic field where ideas, archetypes, instincts, traumas, and values live, transcending the individual. And it is in this field that what we call the social shadow is born, the sum of everything a society refuses to see in itself. Just as an individual represses emotions to be accepted, society represses entire groups, behaviors, and truths to maintain the illusion of order, morality, and civilization. The result? A culture that wears a mask, a population that gets sick together, a system that cancels anything that threatens its narrative of normality. From an early age, we learn what is socially acceptable, and this doesn't happen explicitly. It's taught between the lines, in commercials, in churches, in schools, in soap operas, in adult conversations. Boys learn they must be strong, virile, emotionless. Girls learn they must be sweet, pretty, submissive. The poor are taught to settle. The black child is taught to lower their eyes. The different are taught to hide. That's the social shadow at work, an invisible machine that mutilates subjectivities in the name of conformity. And the more a culture represses its contradictions, the more violent it becomes. Because all collective repression breeds collective compulsion. All social denial breeds social hysteria. That is how the shadow of a society manifests, through systemic violence, religious intolerance, structural racism, and hatred disguised as opinion. But the social shadow doesn't just act through exclusion, it also acts through projection. Whatever a society refuses to face in itself, it projects onto an external enemy. That's how outcasts, heretics, deviants, and threats are created. Instead of facing its own contradictions, the culture chooses someone to carry that burden. And then it points the finger, it demonizes, expels, cancels. Jung saw this clearly. Totalitarian regimes, public lynchings, and moral tribunals are not just political phenomena. They are eruptions of the collective shadow, screaming to be acknowledged. And as long as this shadow remains unexamined, it will keep taking grotesque forms. It will keep producing narcissistic leaders, manipulated crowds, ideological wars, puritanical frenzies, all disguised as virtue. This collective dynamic has a devastating effect on the individual, because even if you work through your personal shadow, you're still immersed in a culture that reinforces denial. You may seek authenticity, but the mold will push back. You may try to be whole, but you'll be mocked for not fitting in. The fear of social judgment is one of the greatest obstacles to shadow integration. That's why the work of individuation, as Jung called the process of becoming who you truly are, requires not only internal courage, but external defiance. You must break from sick consensus, exit the collective script, endure the sideways glances of those still asleep, because any light that turns on will disturb those still hiding in the dark. The social shadow also shapes what you call success. It shapes what you believe you should want. It shapes what you chase, even if you don't truly desire it. Many live unhappy not because they made the wrong choices, but because they never chose. They simply obeyed the collective shadow. They studied what was respectable, married who was appropriate, work where they're admired, and live a script they never wrote. That's the deepest level of systemic sabotage, turning the individual into a product of the norm. The social shadow doesn't want you to think, it wants you to repeat, to obey, to conform, to die accepted. But there is a way out, and it begins with awareness. The awareness that culture has its traumas too, that society lies too, that dominant morality is not always ethical, that what is common is not always healthy, that being normal often means being complicit in collective madness. Jung said, individuation is an antisocial process, but a necessary one, because becoming whole means breaking from the cultural shadow. And that doesn't mean becoming a rebel. It means stopping the act, stopping the shrinking, stopping the guilt that belongs to the system. It means reclaiming your own narrative, one that comes from within, not from the social script. This is the sixth deep cut. The shadow is not just internal, it's also collective. And to overcome your own self-sabotage, you will have to disobey what culture taught you as right. You will have to tear off the social costume and realize that many of the things that hurt you are not yours. They were inherited, programmed, imposed. In the next chapter, we'll explore the most intimate and painful mechanism of the shadow, projection. You'll understand how what irritates you most in others is what you still haven't accepted in yourself. Carl Jung left no room for soft interpretations when he coined one of the most unsettling ideas in depth psychology. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This isn't a metaphor. It's a death sentence for the moralistic ego, because it forces you to realize that the other, the one you judge, criticize, hate, or try to fix, is not the problem. He's the mirror. Projection is the phenomenon by which the unconscious transfers outward what the conscious mind refuses to accept. In other words, you accuse others of carrying what you can't admit lives inside you. And the stronger your reaction, the deeper the shadow you project. The process is subtle. You see someone being arrogant and explode in anger. But perhaps your own arrogance hides as control. You see someone being selfish and you're outraged. But maybe your altruism is just veiled vanity. You hate lazy people, yet secretly envy those who live without guilt. You criticize the show-offs, but deep down, fear that shining will bring rejection. The truth is, anything you criticize with irrational intensity holds a fragment of your shadow. Because if it didn't, you would simply observe without contamination. It's the disproportionate emotion that reveals the projection. It's a compass of the soul pointing inward. Projection is a form of self-defense. When you can't bear to see something in yourself, you export it, you eject it, you paste it onto someone else. This dynamic is behind much of what we call intolerance, prejudice, moralism, hate speech. They are all forms of projected shadow. The homophobe often denies his own repressed sexuality. The racist denies his internalized inferiority. The religious fanatic denies his own desiring shadow. Jung didn't see these as conscious acts of evil, but as symptoms of deep unconsciousness. Because it's much easier to fight an external enemy than to confront the internal abyss, he reflects. But projection doesn't only act in large-scale social polarization. It's everywhere, in marriages, workplaces, friendships, and everyday silent judgments. You say, that person is manipulative, but have you never manipulated through silence, guilt trips, or victimhood? You say, that person is too needy, but don't you hide your own neediness behind excessive independence? Projection has a devastating trait. It turns your wound into an accusation. And that destroys relationships, sabotages bonds, and distorts reality. The only way to break projection is to recognize it. And that hurts, because it means letting go of the sense of superiority. It means stopping the urge to save, fix, or correct others. Jung said, projection makes the world seem much more threatening than it really is. Also, because deep down, what frightens you isn't the other. It's what the other reveals about you. You're disturbed by their freedom because you still self-censor. You're disturbed by their brilliance because you still hide. You're disturbed by their weakness because you still feel shame over yours. The other is just a screen. The film is yours. But there is a hidden power in projections. They are maps to healing. Every time something irritates you, ask, what is this trying to show me about myself? That simple question is dynamite to the ego and a portal to awareness. Anger becomes a mirror. Envy becomes a signal. Judgment becomes an opportunity. And little by little, you begin to realize the world doesn't need to change that much, because the one who changes is your gaze. And a conscious gaze transforms even the biggest triggers into teachers. This is the seventh cut. Every projection is a shadow trying to come home, and only you can welcome it. In the next chapter, we'll dive into one of the most powerful shadow triggers of all, love. Because nothing reveals your shadow more than falling in love, and nothing activates more unconscious sabotage than trying to love with a wounded soul. Few human experiences have the power to reveal the shadow as profoundly as love. Not the idealized love from movies, but real, love. The kind that strips away your control, awakens old memories, exposes you, leaves you raw in front of another person. Carl Jung saw love not as a refuge from the shadow, but as a deep mirror in which the shadow violently reflects. And that is exactly why loving is so hard, because the moment you surrender to another, you also, unknowingly, surrender everything you've tried to hide from yourself. It's in this space of radical intimacy that the shadow rises with full force. Neediness, jealousy, control, dependency, fear of abandonment, the urge to sabotage, it all erupts. Because true love is the arena where the ego dies, and the shadow fights to survive at any cost. At first, everything seems perfect. The other person feels like they complete you, heal you, save you, but over time, the glow of the ideal fades, giving way to confrontation with the real. The one who used to make you smile now irritates you. The one who made you feel whole now suffocates you. The one who brought you life now threatens you with their freedom, and you begin to react. You start to control, to demand, to escape, to cheat, to test. But these reactions are not rational. They are shadow impulses trying to protect unhealed wounds. It's the wounded child still living inside you, desperate not to be abandoned again. Love becomes a battlefield where the enemy is not always the other. It's often inside. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And that transformation is painful because it exposes what was hidden. You realize you never got over the abandonment, that you're still afraid to surrender, that deep down you don't believe you're worthy of love. And so, the games begin. You distance yourself to see if they miss you. You cling too tightly to test if they can handle you. You go silent to be noticed. You overgive to feel validated. All of it is the shadow trying to control what can't be controlled. Surrender. The shadow also appears in the people you choose. You're drawn to distant, cold, unstable, critical partners, not by coincidence, but by pattern. You're attracted to those who activate your original wound. And then you repeat the pain, as if reliving the trauma might finally let you rewrite it. But without awareness, you don't rewrite, you just relive. And that too becomes a form of self-sabotage. To love without integrating your shadow is to place the other in the role of healer, and then blame them for failing to heal you. It's demanding that they love all your parts, including the ones you still reject in yourself. Here lies the brutal paradox. The more you love, the louder your shadow screams, because it feels it's losing control. Real love demands vulnerability, and the shadow hates vulnerability. Because it was precisely in your most vulnerable moments, childhood trauma, loss, that you were wounded. So the shadow activates defenses, turns affection into demand, turns intimacy into jealousy, turns desire into possession, turns fear into escape. And you think you're protecting yourself, but you're not. You're sabotaging. Sabotaging the one space where true healing could happen, the bond with another. But there is a key. And that key lies in how you respond to discomfort. If you use the other as a mirror, love becomes alchemy. Every trigger becomes a chance to heal. Every conflict becomes a signal of where your shadow still rules. You begin to realize jealousy is fear of abandonment. Demanding is fear of not being enough. Control is fear of losing. Escaping is fear of feeling too much. These are the voices of the shadow. And if you have the courage to listen to them without identifying with them, the integration begins. Love then stops being war and becomes a laboratory of self-awareness. This is the eighth cut. Love reveals exactly where you're still wounded. And if you have the courage, love can also be the remedy. But not the kind of love that demands, the kind that observes, that listens, that acknowledges that the shadow is part of the relationship and that only those who are willing to walk through the inferno of their own soul, side by side, can truly heal together. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most mysterious languages of the shadow, dreams. Because your unconscious speaks to you every night, and what it says may be the key to freeing what you haven't yet understood. While you sleep, your mind speaks, but not with words. It speaks with images, symbols, distortions, fragmented voices, and all of it comes from the unconscious. For Carl Jung, dreams were not mental accidents or psychic garbage. They were the precise language of the soul, trying to communicate what consciousness during the day refuses to hear. And in almost every dream he analyzed, there it was, the shadow. Disguised as a strange figure, a pursuer, a mutilated body, an accident, a monster, a distorted mirror. Jung saw dreams as nighttime letters written by the unconscious, a letter that can only be read by those brave enough to decipher their own inner symbols. Because dreams don't lie, they reveal. The shadow in dreams always shows up as what you reject. If you deny your anger, it appears as fire. If you repress your sexuality, it surfaces as confusing, invasive, uncomfortable scenes. If you suppress your ambition, it shows up as endless corridors you can't cross. The unconscious builds symbolic scenarios where everything that is repressed becomes image, and these images serve a brutal function to restore psychic balance. Because the mind cannot live divided forever, and dreams are the last cry of the soul when you refuse to hear it while awake. Jung called this psychic compensation. During the day, you pretend everything's fine. In the dream, you appear crying. During the day, you try to control everything. In the dream, everything collapses. During the day, you live to please. In the dream, someone confronts you. The unconscious uses dreams to bring to the surface what has been buried, often in dramatic, chaotic, symbolic ways, because the language of the shadow is not logical. It is mythological. It speaks like the old gods, with metaphors, with mirrors, with archetypes. That's why dream interpretation is not about prediction, it's about descent. But most people ignore their dreams. They wake up, get out of bed and say, "It was just a dream," as if it were meaningless noise. But it wasn't, it was a dialogue. It was your unconscious trying to show you where you're lying to yourself. Jung said every dream is a healing attempt. Even nightmares, especially nightmares, because they carry the shadow more intensely. They hold the most distorted, visceral, symbolic images. You dream of someone dying, it may be the end of an internal cycle. You dream of betrayal, it may be your own self-betrayal. You dream of falling, it may be your ego collapsing. You dream of being chased, it may be a part of you trying to emerge while you run from it. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be seen. And when it isn't seen, it seeps into the only remaining channel, the dream. That's why ignoring your dreams is staying deaf to your own soul. Worse, it's staying blind to your inner saboteur. Because dreams often show you exactly how you're sabotaging yourself. They show the fears you deny, the desires you've buried, the characters you've built to survive, but can no longer carry. And when you begin to record your dreams, write them down, interpret them, something shifts. Awareness expands. The shadow begins to dissolve. The sabotage loses power. But beware, dream interpretation cannot be generic. There is no universal dream dictionary that truly works, because the symbols in your mind are yours law. Dreaming of a snake may mean transformation for one and fear of betrayal for another. Water may represent peace for one and emotional drowning for another. Jung said the symbol must be contextualized within the person's life. That's why more important than interpreting the dream is feeling what it evokes, because it is that emotional response that reveals the shadow's message. This is the ninth cut. The shadow speaks to you every night, and only those who choose to stay asleep fail to hear it. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the shadow expands into even greater dimensions. becoming myths, religions, entities, demons, and gods. Because the shadow is also collective, and it helped build the very symbols that shaped your beliefs. Carl Jung was excommunicated from within before he was ever misunderstood from without, when he stated that gods, angels, demons, and myths were not merely external entities, but symbolic expressions of the deepest layers of the psyche. He shook the very foundations of what the Western world considered spirituality. But Jung wasn't denying God. He was saying something far more powerful and far more dangerous. The archetypes you worship live inside you. And that includes the ones you fear. That includes the shadow. For Jung, religious figures, mythological symbols, heroes, and monsters found across all cultures are manifestations of the collective unconscious. And all of them serve a psychic function, to help human beings confront and eventually integrate what is most primitive, dangerous, and sacred within themselves. The shadow, when ignored, gets projected. And when millions of people ignore the same aspect of themselves, their rage, envy, lust for power, repressed desire, those emotions condense and take symbolic form in the collective imagination. And that form gains a name, a cult, a doctrine. The devil, for example, is not merely an external being tempting you. It is the archetypal personification of the instincts you were taught to hate in yourself. Lust, anger, selfishness, hunger for control. All of these were cast into a symbolic hell. But they didn't die, they remain alive. And even more dangerous, because now you believe they are outside of you. And that belief makes you manipulable. Jung saw clearly what ancient traditions had always known. The gods are structural metaphors for the dynamics of the human soul. In every mythology, the shadow appears dressed as a deity or a curse. Hades, Loki, Set, Kali, Lilith, all expressions of the soul's dark side, yet carrying power, wisdom, and transformation. Rejecting these archetypes is rejecting fundamental aspects of human existence. That's why, throughout history, the more a society repressed its instincts, the more radical, punitive, and destructive it became. Because what is not integrated repeats. What is not embraced explodes. Myths are maps. Every hero descending into the underworld is descending into his own shadow. Every dragon faced is an internal fear. Every trial is a psychic crisis. Every return is a reintegration. Joseph Campbell, Jung's symbolic disciple, said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And Jung would add, "That cave is you." The myth is not out there. It is a symbolic dramatization of your individuation process. The apocalypse is the death of the ego. The cross is the sacrifice of the persona. The rebirth is the emergence of the self after the storm. And all of these events are happening right now inside your soul as you resist seeing who you really are. And what happens when you don't recognize these myths as internal? You project them. You believe evil is out there, that the enemy is always someone else, that the divine only lives in the heavens. And then you become a prisoner of narratives. You live in fear of punishment. You try to be pure while hiding your impure desires. You seek redemption outside while abandoning your inner hell without healing. Jung knew that no salvation comes from outside, because the devil, the hero, and the god all belong to the same symbolic system we call the psyche. And the most dangerous consequence of failing to understand this: you become a hostage to anyone who claims to have the truth. Because when a person doesn't know their internal symbols, any external symbol will control them. Religious leaders, political figures, ideologues, corporations, they all use archetypes to manipulate the collective soul. They know your fear of inner chaos is so great that all they need to do is offer a structure, a doctrine, a product, a salvation, and the masses will obey. Not because they were convinced, but because they're unconscious of their own symbolic power. This is the 10th cut, The shadow became a god because you refused to see it as part of you. And as long as you worship what should be integrated, you will serve fear. In the next chapter, we'll flip the script. We'll show how the greatest heroes in history, warriors, leaders, visionaries, succeeded not because they denied the shadow, but because they faced it and returned with it tamed. You'll understand why the true hero is a shadow at peace. There's an elegant lie circulating out there that the hero is the one who defeats evil, the one who kills the enemy, slays the dragon, destroys the villain. But Carl Jung and every major myth of humanity says the opposite. The true hero does not destroy the darkness, he integrates it. He dives into his own abyss, stares into the eyes of what he most fears in himself, and returns with a tamed fragment of the shadow. He is not pure, he is not immaculate, he is not clean, he is whole, and that's why he has power. Because the one who denies the shadow remains fragile, but the one who faces it becomes invincible. Not because he no longer feels fear, but because he now knows where it comes from. Jung saw the hero's journey not as poetic metaphor, but as an internal map that every human is walking, consciously or unconsciously. In every archetypal story, from Odysseus to Frodo, from Buddha to Christ, from Moses to Harry Potter, there is a structure: the call, the refusal, the descent into the underworld, the confrontation with the shadow, the symbolic death, and the return with the elixir. This is not literary, it is psychic. It is the path of individuation, the process by which the ego, fragile, conditioned, limited, is partially dissolved so that self, the whole indestructible center of personality, can emerge. But this is not easy, because the true hero does what almost no one is willing to do: stop blaming the world. He stops pointing fingers. He descends. He takes responsibility. He understands that the dragon is his, that the monster is internal, that the voice saying "you are not enough" lives inside, and only he can silence it. Alexander, Napoleon, Mandela, Gandhi, Musashi, Mother Teresa, Viktor Frankl, Jung, Nietzsche, all of them at some point faced brutal personal shadows. Jung with his visionary madness, Frankl with the void of the concentration camp, Musashi with the literal and symbolic death of dozens of enemies, Teresa with her crisis of faith, Gandhi with his inner violence. They didn't become powerful in spite of the shadow, but because of it. Because the shadow, when faced with awareness, doesn't destroy, it delivers power. Inside fear lives courage. Inside anger lives vital energy. Inside envy lives repressed desire. Inside selfishness lives the impulse for self-preservation. The hero does not try to kill these forces. He recognizes them. He names them. He opens an internal dialogue. And then he transforms. He channels. Anger becomes focus. Pain becomes compassion. Trauma becomes service. Fear becomes wisdom. That's what the great masters did. They didn't deny their darkness. They turned it into a weapon in service of the light. But beware, this process doesn't happen in comfort. The hero's journey demands isolation, crisis, disruption, often loss. Because the shadow doesn't appear when everything is fine. It emerges in collapse. When everything falls apart, when the ground disappears, when certainties shatter, that's when the shadow shows its face. And that's when the hero chooses: run or descend. Most run. They pretend, they distract. They drink, buy, scream, blame, repeat. The hero does not. The hero dives, and in that dive, he finds something that can never be taken away: truth. Jung used to say, the gold is in the shadow, and that gold is real power, indestructible truth, unshakable center. When the hero returns, he does not come back the same. He returns with scars and with wisdom. He is no longer naive, no longer a slave to himself, because now he knows everything that once sabotaged him now serves him. He didn't lose the shadow, he tamed it. And that's why he leads, because the one who masters himself can walk among monsters without becoming one. This is the 11th cut. The hero is not the one who killed the shadow, but the one who taught it to fight by his side. In the next chapter, you'll discover the method, the real, practical process of shadow integration according to Jung, not as theory, but as ritual, as path, as inner practice. It's time to stop understanding and start practicing. Up until now, you've understood that the shadow exists, that it sabotages, hides, and projects itself. You've seen how it appears in dreams, in love, in crises, in explosions, in addictions. And you've learned that every hero, every master, every whole human being had to face it in order to live with truth. But now it's time to go one step further, because knowing about the shadow doesn't change your life. What changes your life is what you do with that knowledge. And Carl Jung was not just a thinker, he was a guide. He left a map, a method, a concrete process, although brutal, for you to integrate the shadow and stop it from ruling your life from behind the scenes. First, the confrontation. There is no integration without exposure. You must stop running. You must sit with yourself and let the shadow speak. And it will speak, it will scream, it will spit out memories you tried to forget, it will show impulses you wish you didn't have, it will replay scenes from your life that you'd rather bury. But confrontation is the beginning. Jung said that the unconscious only transforms when it is brought to consciousness with feeling. This means it's not enough to understand rationally. You need to feel the impact of your own darkness. You must face it without shields, without justification, without spiritualizing, without romanticizing. Then, symbolic listening. The shadow doesn't speak Portuguese. It speaks in images, in repeated patterns, in physical symptoms, in slips, in dreams, in exaggerated reactions. Listening to the shadow means developing the ability to read your own internal symbols. Writing down dreams, tracking self-sabotage patterns, observing intense reactions, identifying the roles you play. This is listening. And to listen in this context is not to eliminate. It's to understand. It's to ask, what is this trying to show me? When you do that, the shadow begins to calm, because what it wanted all along was to be recognized. The third step, conscious dialogue. Jung called this process active imagination. You literally talk to your shadow, not as play acting, but as psychic ritual. You close your eyes and visualize the part of you that sabotages, screams, runs, explodes, and you ask, why are you doing this? And you listen to the answer. This practice is deep, symbolic, intense, and it must be done with respect, because what you are accessing is not a monster, it is a wounded part of your psyche that learned to protect you in dysfunctional ways. And if you listen, it will show you what it needs in order to stop dominating you. Then comes symbolic reintegration. You begin to realize that the part you hated had a role. Anger defended you when no one else did. Control gave you structure in chaos. Fear protected you from abandonment. When you honor the function of the shadow without submitting to it, it becomes an ally. That is integration. You no longer act from the shadow. You act with it. The shadow doesn't disappear. But now it has a place. It has a name. It has a voice. And most importantly, it no longer rules. The final stage, commitment to truth. Because integrating the shadow is an ongoing process. It doesn't happen over a weekend. It doesn't happen in a retreat. It's a practice, a way of living. Every day you will be tested. Every day the shadow will try to get back behind the wheel. But now you know it is not your enemy. It is a reminder, a mirror, and also a source of immense energy, creativity, sexuality, intuition, and power. When integrated, the shadow makes you whole, and a whole human being no longer needs to pretend, no longer needs to please, no longer needs to hide. This is the 11th cut. Integration is the most courageous act a human being can practice, and only those who practice it can truly live with authenticity. In the next chapter, we'll go even deeper, because trauma is the secret portal through which the shadow enters. And understanding this is essential to freeing the part of you that still lives trapped in the past. Trauma doesn't scream, it whispers. It hides in the details, in the choices you keep repeating, in the silences you can't stand, in the reactions that seem disproportionate, in chronic fatigue, in senseless procrastination, in the fear of being loved. Carl Jung understood trauma as one of the entry points of the shadow, an unprocessed emotional event or pattern that slips into the core of the psyche and from there builds a secret narrative, a story you don't even realize you're telling, but that controls everything you do. An unhealed trauma doesn't disappear. It becomes language, symbolic, repetitive, sabotaging, and until you face it, it will keep speaking for you. But not all trauma comes from major events. Many come from what was missing, the absence of affection, the silence after the crying, subtle abandonment, the blank stare of someone who was supposed to care, the love that never came. Jung called these soul wounds, psychic marks that shape the unconscious and create internal adaptations just to survive the pain. The rejected child becomes the adult who hides. The devalued child becomes the adult who kills themselves trying to prove their worth. The betrayed child becomes the adult who distrusts even real love. And the worst part, these adaptations become identity. You no longer know where the trauma ends and where your true self begins. That's the central point. Trauma creates a version of you that survived, but now must die. The shadow is born exactly at this point, the moment when, to avoid going insane, you created a persona, a self that functions, pleases, avoids pain, and that self becomes your armor. But there comes a time when the armor weighs more than it protects. You start feeling like you're living a programmed life, like there's something deeper, freer, more real within you, but that something is locked behind the pain you still haven't faced. Jung knew that trauma holds power, but that power can be transmuted, because trauma is where the ego broke and where the self can emerge. But only if you stop running. You don't need to get over your trauma. You need to integrate it. That means revisiting the past with the eyes of an adult. It means stopping the self-judgment for having suffered. It means accepting that the pain happened, that the absence existed, that it shaped you, and from there you begin to separate what is truly you from what is just a survival mechanism. Trauma doesn't have to be a prison. It can be the portal to the core of who you are. Self-sabotage is often just trauma trying to keep you in familiar territory, because the familiar, even if painful, feels safe. The shadow linked to trauma is terrified of the new. It fears surrender, change, risk, because all of that reminds it of old abandonment. So it pulls you back, it convinces you that it's not the right time, that you're not ready, that something will go wrong, but nothing is going wrong. What's happening is growth, and the shadow is scared. To break this cycle, you need courage. Courage to feel what you've avoided for years. Courage to name the voids. Courage to see that sometimes the deepest trauma was the absence of something you didn't even know was missing. This recognition is not self-help, it's reconstruction. You're not trying to be happy, you're trying to become whole. And that means bringing to light all the parts that trauma buried. This is the 12th cut. Trauma is the womb of the shadow, but it can also be the birth of your true self. In the next chapter, we'll touch on something that seems spiritual, but is psychological to the bone: toxic positivity. Because denying your negative emotions is not light, it's cowardice, and the shadow loves it when you pretend it doesn't exist. We live in an era addicted to light, addicted to smiles, to positive affirmations, to compulsive gratitude, to motivational quotes taped to the wall while the soul collapses inside. Carl Jung warned with brutal clarity, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But the modern world does the opposite. It numbs, it suffocates, it commands you to smile when you should be screaming. It says, "Think positive," when your pain is begging to be seen. This culture of toxic positivity heals no one. It just pushes the shadow even deeper, and therefore even more dangerous. Toxic positivity creates a world where legitimate emotions are treated as flaws. Feeling anger, you're vibrating low. Feeling envy, you lack gratitude. Feeling fear, you have no faith. You're in pain, then you didn't attract enough. And slowly you learn to mask everything that makes you human. But anger signals disrespect. Envy signals blocked desire. Fear signals something that needs preparation. And pain is the rightful cry of a part of you that is being ignored. Denying it doesn't make you stronger, it makes you fragmented. And a fragmentation is the shadow's favorite food. Because the shadow loves toxic positivity. It hides behind it. While you pretend everything is fine, the shadow acts, it sabotages, it infiltrates, it makes decisions for you, it makes you smile so you won't be abandoned, it makes you say yes when you wanted to say no, it makes you stay in empty relationships just to seem grateful. All of this is self-abandonment disguised as good vibes. And the more you repress what you feel, the louder the body speaks. Anxiety, unexplained exhaustion, insomnia, compulsions. Because the body stores everything, the mind keeps sweeping under the spiritual rug. Integrating the shadow requires emotional maturity. And emotional maturity means welcoming the entire spectrum of human experience. There is no self-knowledge without pain, no evolution without rupture, no freedom without confronting your inner demons. And they don't go away with mantras, they go away with presence, with truth, with the courage to say, "Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm envious. Yes, I'm afraid." And by naming it, you don't sink. You're freed. Because what makes you sick is not feeling, it's repression. What sabotages you isn't emotion. It's the fake persona trying to look healed. Jung didn't believe in perfection. He believed in wholeness. And wholeness includes light and shadow, courage and fear, love and pain. True positivity doesn't deny the darkness. It walks through it without falling apart. It's the kind of strength that says, "I'm not a saint, but I'm not a fraud either." And that strength only appears when you stop trying to be what the world expects and start being what your soul demands. False spiritual glow is the new prison. Freedom begins when you accept being human before trying to be enlightened. This is the 13th cut. The light you're so desperately seeking is only born when you allow yourself to walk through the darkness you've avoided all your life. In the next chapter, we'll explore how truth, spoken in the flesh without makeup, is the only real cure for inner chaos, and how radical honesty with yourself is the beginning of the end of sabotage. No healing begins with medicine. Every healing begins with truth. And on the path of the shadow, truth is not a beautiful concept. It is a cut, a deep cut, often cruel, where the ego suffocates under the weight of everything you've pretended to be for years. Carl Jung knew this, and that's why he declared, "The encounter with one's own soul is often a terrifying experience, but it is the only way. Because as long as you keep lying to yourself, nothing changes." You can go to therapy, read books, watch videos, attend retreats, pray, meditate, but if you don't have the courage to face what is real, you will keep spinning in circles, running, repeating, sabotaging. Truth hurts, and that's why almost no one lives it. Most people prefer the gray zone. It's not great, but it's not unbearable. Things are kinda bad, but I can manage. This is the territory of chronic self-sabotage. It's the place where you settle for a life you didn't choose, where you accept mediocre relationships, soulless jobs, routines that kill you slowly. Also, you don't have to face the truth that you're living below what your soul demands. The shadow loves this place. It whispers, "Better to stay here. Out there is uncertain. Out there hurts. At least here, you already know the pain." And so you stay, paralyzed. And to endure, you lie. You lie to yourself. Lying to yourself is the most sophisticated form of emotional suicide. It starts small. "I'm fine. It's just a phase. I don't care." But the body knows, the soul knows. The unconscious records each omission as a new fracture. And each fracture reinforces the persona. The one who smiles, so no one worries. The one who says he's happy for others' success, but dies of envy. The one who claims to have forgiven, but still holds on to hatred. The one who says he doesn't miss someone, but cries in secret. This persona may function in the world, but it doesn't live. It survives. And behind it, the shadow grows. Healing begins when you take off the mask, even if it's for the first time. When you write what you've never said out loud. When you admit what you hide even from yourself. When you look in the mirror and say, "I'm tired of pretending." That one sentence, said with presence, breaks the spell. Because the shadow doesn't need to be illuminated with esoteric wisdom. It needs only one thing: truth. And truth is always uncomfortable at first. But soon after, it sets you free. Because everything that holds you captive requires maintenance. Lies require effort. Illusions demand energy. When you drop it all, something inside you is released. Something that's been waiting for you for a very long time. Jung said, "Self-knowledge is a process of unlearning." You don't need to find out who you are. You need to stop maintaining who you are not. And it starts with the courage to say, "It was me. I sabotaged myself. I lied. Followed my truth out of fear of losing someone. I sold myself for crumbs. I sinned against my own soul." This radical honesty is not punishment. It is reconnection. It is the starting point of a new story, one where the shadow no longer controls, but walks beside you. Because now it no longer needs to sabotage you to be seen. It has been recognized. It has been heard. It has been named. This is the 14th cut. Only with truth can heal the soul you've been hiding. In the next and penultimate chapter, we will see what happens when you stop fighting the shadow and start living in peace with it. We'll explore the most feared and most necessary figure in this journey, the shadow warrior. The one who does not deny himself and therefore becomes free. The image of the warrior is familiar: sword in hand, shining armor, upright posture, unwavering gaze. But that is the illusion of the plastic hero, the unreal perfection, the persona that fights to appear as strong, not to be whole. Carl Jung offered another archetype, denser, truer, more dangerous: the shadow warrior. The one who has already crossed his own hell and returned, the one who has bled internally, faced his own monsters, killed what needed to die. He is not invulnerable. He is honest. He doesn't pretend. He doesn't hide. He doesn't perform. He knows himself. And that's why he wins. The shadow warrior does not fight others. He fights illusion. He fights cowardice disguised as peace. Hypocrisy dressed as spirituality, the persona that culture shoves under your skin. He doesn't want to please. He doesn't seek approval. He doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. His strength lies in silence, in the gaze that pierces, in the presence that unsettles. He is both shadow and light, and that's why he cannot be manipulated. Because the one who has recognized his darkest impulses knows exactly when someone is trying to use them against him. This warrior is not cruel, but he is not docile either. He is just, but never tamed. He knows how to say no without shouting, He knows how to cut ties without causing drama. He knows how to close cycles without apologizing for protecting his peace. Because he understands that living truthfully often means being misunderstood. Jung once said, "He who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens." The shadow warrior has awakened, and now he carries a kind of freedom that the asleep call coldness, the fragile call arrogance, and the manipulators call ego. But it is none of these. It is simply someone who no longer needs to pretend in order to survive. This warrior has learned that being whole is more important than being accepted, and that's why he doesn't fit in. But he also doesn't isolate. He walks among others without fear of being different, because he carries a truth so sharp that no one can touch him without feeling their own reflection. He lives without asking for permission, loves without self-erasure, serves without self-humiliation, and fights without losing his dignity because he knows the shadow. He has knelt before it. He has looked it in the eye, heard it scream, felt its venom, and survived. Survived so that he'd never again be a hostage, not to others, not to himself. This is the deepest point of the shadow journey. When you stop trying to be light and start becoming whole. When you no longer need to fake virtue. When you can feel anger without acting in cruelty, feel envy without self-sabotage, feel fear without paralysis. The shadow warrior does not deny what he feels, but he does not bow to what he feels either. He feels, he understands, he chooses, he acts. That is real power, the kind of power that doesn't need a stage, applause, or approval, the kind of power that is born the moment you stop running from yourself. This is the 15th cut. The shadow warrior is not perfect. He is true, and only those who become true can finally live in lightness. In the next and final block, we will synthesize this journey into 3 practical laws, 3 essential cuts, 3 pillars that you can apply right now to disarm self-sabotage, integrate the shadow, and walk with clarity. The 3 laws of the shadow. Up to this point, you've crossed through theory, pain, history, myths, and the deepest layers of the unconscious. But the shadow, beyond being a symbolic phenomenon, is also a system, a pattern with its own internal rules. And if you don't understand these rules, you'll be thrown against yourself for the rest of your life. Carl Jung, after studying hundreds of patients, noticing dreams, breakdowns, healings, and psychotic episodes, decoded a repetitive pattern found in almost every case of self-sabotage. A pattern that can be condensed into 3 laws, 3 operational truths that, once understood, return your power to you. These are the 3 laws of the shadow. The first law: everything you don't accept in yourself, you will hate in others. The shadow doesn't disappear when repressed. It simply changes address, and its favorite address is someone else's face. That criticism that annoys you, that freedom that irritates you, that confidence that offends you, that arrogance that provokes you, all of it might actually be fragments of yourself projected onto other people. If you hate people who are assertive, perhaps you've silenced your own authority. If you feel disgust toward those who express sensuality, maybe you've repressed your own desire. If you despise people who fail in public, maybe you fear exposing your own flaws. This first law teaches one brutal truth: what most provokes you in others belongs to you. And until you accept that, you'll keep being manipulated by what you judge. The second law: the shadow, when unheard, will show up as self-sabotage. The unconscious is not passive, it acts. And if you refuse to hear your pain, your rage, your fears, and repressed desires, they will act for you as sabotage. It will show up as a bad choice, an inexplicable delay, a repeated accident, a destructive outburst, a relapse. The shadow is not evil, it's ignored. And when ignored, it surfaces violently. It will block what you consciously want, until you hear what it unconsciously needs. When you notice that everything breaking down in your life follows the same emotional pattern, stop. It's not bad luck. It's the shadow speaking. And only those with courage to stop running can hear its voice. The third law, the integrated shadow becomes power. The repressed one becomes prison. The shadow is raw, psychic energy. When rejected, it becomes poison, but when welcomed, it becomes your most brutal force. Rage becomes assertiveness. Envy becomes ambition. Fear becomes focus. Pride becomes dignity. Aggression becomes action. The shadow holds buried talents, hidden power, vital forces you chose to hide to be accepted. But everything you once repressed to survive must now return for you to truly live. Integration isn't giving free rein to emotion. It's recognizing its symbolic role. It's saying, this is also me, and now it's under my command. That's transmutation, gold in the mud, power that no one can take because it's now conscious. These three laws are keys, simple but profound. If you examine your judgments with honesty, you'll see your shadow projected. If you investigate your patterns of downfall, you'll find unspoken wounds. And if you welcome what you used to reject, you'll access a power that was buried but never dead. Jung knew the unconscious is a fertile field, but it only blooms when the lie dies. These laws kill the lie that the problem is outside, the lie that you're just a victim, the lie that being good is enough. The world doesn't need good people. It needs whole people. And this is the 16th cut. Those who live ignoring these three laws live being dominated by them. In the next and penultimate block, we'll apply this to real life, to daily life, to the situations that challenge you most: love, work, loneliness. Because that's where the shadow operates. Do right when you think everything is under control. The shadow doesn't attack where you're weak. It infiltrates where you most want to succeed. Where your desire, energy, and hope are invested, that's where it whispers the loudest, because it knows that where your dream lives, so does your greatest fear. Carl Jung warned that the shadow operates most powerfully in the territories where the ego has built the illusion of control. That's why it shows up so fiercely in three central areas of life: love, work, and solitude. Places where you strive to conquer, but where your hidden self may still be sabotaging you, invisibly, repeatedly, and painfully. Let's start with love. The shadow in love doesn't appear as aggression right away. It disguises itself as neediness, masquerading as devotion, as control dressed up as care, as jealousy painted as protection, as avoidance masked as freedom. You say you want true love, but fall for those who are emotionally unavailable. You say you desire reciprocity, but keep chasing relationships where you're always the one proving your worth. You say you long for connection, but run when it actually shows up. That's not bad luck. That's your shadow repeating a pattern you haven't had the courage to break. Maybe you were rejected, and now you unconsciously choose lovers who confirm that rejection is inevitable. Maybe you grew up having to earn love, and now you only love where you have to suffer to be seen. The shadow in love operates with subtle cruelty. It makes you confuse intensity with destiny, pain with depth, attachment with passion, and if left unchecked, it turns love into an emotional prison. You're not really relating to the other, you're relating to your traumas projected onto them. You expect them to save you, to understand you without words, to heal you without openness. That's not mature. That's the shadow turning you into a needy child in an adult body. The only way out is to grow, to integrate, to love consciously, to see the other as the other, not a mirror of your unresolved past. Now, in work, the shadow works differently. It hides in performance, in comparison, in perfectionism, in an obsessive need for approval. You sabotage yourself because you're afraid of being seen, Or you overwork because you're afraid of not being enough. You procrastinate because you fear failure, or you burn out because you don't know how to rest without guilt. You say you want success, but the moment it arrives, you freeze. Why? Because your shadow believes success brings rejection, or isolation, or pressure, or scrutiny. The shadow in work blocks your growth because it associates success with pain. And often you settle for less than you deserve because deep down you believe that that's all someone like you is allowed to have. This belief isn't rational, it's unconscious, and it's what decides how much you earn, where you stay silent, where you give up. And in solitude, the shadow reigns, because when no one else is around, it's all that remains. Silence becomes a scream. Memories resurface, the body speaks, the emptiness swells. Jung said, "Loneliness is not the absence of people, but the inability to express what is essential." You feel this when you're alone and can't be at peace. When your phone becomes a crutch, when food becomes comfort, when sleep becomes escape, what you call boredom might just be the shadow trying to talk to you. And you're afraid because listening to yourself requires strength few possess, the strength to face what no one else can carry for you. But here's the truth. It's exactly in those three places, love, work, and solitude, where your greatest power lives. If you can see your shadow in each of them, you'll find your path to liberation. Love will stop being a stage of pain and become a space for healing. Work will stop being a battleground and become a channel for expression. Solitude will stop being a punishment and become a sanctuary. But for that, you must stop running, stop hiding, stop repeating the phrase, "That's just how I am." No, that's not how you are. That's how you're behaving, because your shadow is still in charge. But it doesn't have to be. And it all begins with this cut, realizing that at the place where it hurts the most is the place where healing wants to be born. This is the 17th cut. The shadow hides in the places where you most dream of winning, but instead of being your enemy, it can be your guide. In the next and penultimate block, we'll talk about the final collapse of the persona, the symbolic death of the social self, and the birth of true consciousness. There comes a moment in the journey of every awakened human being, a point of no return, a moment when everything you've built starts to collapse, when the name you carry, the role you play, the image you present, no longer makes sense. Carl Jung knew this collapse well. He called it individuation. But the technical term doesn't capture the pain, because what happens here is grief. Grief for the person you pretended to be for years. The end of the persona, the symbolic death of the social ego, and the fragile birth of who you are, without filters, applause, layers, or lies. This persona didn't appear out of nowhere. It was created to protect, to please, to guarantee love, survival, acceptance. It was shaped in childhood, reinforced in school, fueled at work, and idolized on social media. But eventually, and this comes for everyone who dares to awaken, you realize this you the world sees is not you, and the soul begins to scream. The sabotage intensifies, the boredom explodes, success loses its flavor, love turns into exhaustion, the mask begins to weigh heavy, and what once protected you now imprisons you, because the soul can no longer bear the act. The death of the persona is not voluntary, it is inevitable. You can resist, try to glue the pieces back together, keep pretending a bit longer, but something inside has already been touched, and once it's touched, it can't be untouched. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain, and this pain is the unraveling. You start to forget why you do what you do. You look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. You begin to doubt dreams that once felt so vivid, because they weren't the soul's dreams. They were the personas, and now the soul wants to live. But for the soul to live, the persona must die. This death may arrive as a crisis, a firing, a breakup, an illness, a breakdown. But more than the external event, it's the internal collapse that matters. That moment when you realize you've spent years playing a role. The funny friend, the flawless professional, the strong woman, the invulnerable man, the spiritual one, the rational one, the charmer, the good guy, the warrior woman, all personas, all constructions, all walls between you and your true self. When the wall falls, everything goes dark, because the ego was the lighthouse, and now it's gone. But it's cause in that darkness that the real light can be born. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But this requires going through the dark night of the soul, through the desert where nothing feels certain, where the applause stops, where no one understands what you're feeling. This is the crossing into tandid psychic maturity. It's no longer about being admired. It's about being authentic. No longer about appearing strong. It's about embracing your complexity. And that acceptance, as lonely as it may feel, is the beginning of peace. Because now, without the persona, you can finally rest. You can exist without performing. You can breathe without needing to explain. This is the 18th cut. The mask you wear to be loved is the same one that keeps you from loving yourself. In the next and final block, we'll seal this journey with Jung's ultimate revelation, the golden rule. The one principle capable of protecting you from all manipulation, external or internal. The final code of integrity that only works when the shadow is seen, welcomed, and integrated. Carl Jung didn't leave us ready-made answers. He left us paths. And at the center of every single one of them, there was a compass, a simple, silent, but non-negotiable principle. A rule that, once understood, shields you from every form of manipulation, from others, from the world, and from yourself. Jung called it integration. But what he truly meant was this: a whole person cannot be used. And that is the golden rule, the final code, the sharpest cut of the entire journey. Because it doesn't matter how much you study, meditate, or fight. If you're still divided on the inside, you will always be vulnerable on the outside. And there's only one antidote to this: to become whole. Being whole doesn't mean being perfect. It means no longer betraying yourself. Great! It means recognizing your light without becoming intoxicated by pride, and recognizing your shadow without drowning in shame. It means feeling anger without acting cruelly, feeling fear without running away from yourself, feeling envy and transforming it into clean desire. It means no longer hiding what you feel just to be loved, no longer adapting to what others expect of you, no longer sacrificing your truth in exchange for belonging. Jung's golden rule is brutal in its simplicity. The more conscious you are of your shadow, the less manipulable you become. Because everything you deny can be used against you. Deny your neediness, someone will trap you with affection. Deny your ambition, someone will trap you with money. Deny your vanity, someone will trap you with compliments. Deny your fear, someone will trap you with threats. Deny your desire, someone will trap you with pleasure. The shadow you refuse to integrate becomes a noose around your neck. And the world pulls that rope with smiles, with contracts, with likes, with silence, with promises. Only those who have seen their own shadow, clearly, coldly, compassionately, courageously, know exactly when someone is trying to use it against them. The integrity Jung proposed was not moral. It was structural. It was about building a self that no longer needs to pretend. A self that doesn't shatter when criticized. That doesn't need validation to exist. That doesn't panic when rejected. A self with enough depth to withstand silence, pain, crisis, without collapsing. That self is only born when the shadow is seen, named, held, embraced. When you understand that being good was never the goal, The goal was always to be whole. This is the highest point of the journey. There is no more fear of others, no more fear of truth, no more fear of loss, because now you are whole, whole in the Jungian sense. You know what you feel, you know what you want, you know what you can take, you know what you'll never tolerate again, you know who you are without needing anyone to confirm it. That is freedom. And that's why Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens." Because the one who awakens to their own shadow is never again captured by the theater of others. This is the 19th and final cut. The secret of the shadow is that it was never your enemy. It just wanted to be seen, and now that it has, it bows, and you rise. Not as a persona, but as someone who knows the only way to be free is to be whole. You don't need to run anymore. Not from others, not from the world, not from yourself. Everything you've avoided feeling, everything you've pretended to forget, everything you've projected onto others is right here, waiting for you, not to destroy you, but to bring you back to yourself. Because at the end of this entire journey, you won't find a new persona. You'll find what remains when every mask has fallen. And what remains is what's real. The shadow was never meant to be eliminated. It was meant to teach you where you abandoned yourself. And now that you've seen it, you have a choice, the most important one of your life. You can keep denying and keep repeating. You can keep smiling to please and bleeding in silence. You can keep pretending that everything's fine and keep sabotaging everything that truly matters. Or you can finally face yourself, hold yourself, integrate, and say, "I am not just light. I am also everything I was taught to hide, but now I am whole." This video is not about self-help. It's about psychic survival. It's about freeing your true name, Unsun, from the prison of performance, and that doesn't happen all at once. It happens every day, every time you choose truth over approval, every time you say no to what shrinks you, every time you choose to feel, even when it hurts, every time you remember there is no evolution without shadow and no freedom without wholeness. So before you leave this space, do one thing. Close your eyes and say your own name out loud. No irony, no shame, no rush, just that. Say your name like you're coming home, like you've stopped running, like you remember the only truth that can set you free was inside you all along. If this video touched you, share it with someone who's also ready to stop pretending. Someone who's tired of being a slave to themselves. And if you want to keep this message close as a reminder of strength, hit the button below, subscribe, and save this video. Because the next time your shadow tries to take over, you'll remember who's in charge. And who's in charge is the one who knows themselves.